Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's lesson. My name is Mrs. Collum, and I will be your teacher for today's lesson. So we have finished learning all the parts of an essay. I've gone over planning for an essay, how to write the introduction, all the middle paragraphs, the R1, R2, R3, and conclusion. So we are done learning the parts. It doesn't mean we're not going to practice more, but we're done learning all the parts. In today's lesson, we're going to focus just on transition words. So if you remember, every time we write an essay, we always use first, second, and third. And today we're going to learn more advanced transitions. So let me share my screen with you. All right, so I want you to think about, you wrote a whole essay. And many of you may have thought that that's something you weren't going to be able to do or thought it was going to be harder than it actually was. So I want you to take a minute just to reflect on this and think, how did it feel learning and writing an entire essay? What part did you think was the easiest? And what part did you think was the hardest? I always think it's good to take time to reflect on what you've done. So I just want you to think about that for a minute, because there were many pieces to writing the essay. So what was the easy part? Was it planning? Was it introduction? Was it the middle paragraphs? Was it the conclusion? And what was the hardest part? Just think about that for a few seconds. Now, today we're going to be talking about transition words. Now, remember, like I was just saying, we always use first, second, and third. And I kept telling you we're going to keep using first, second, and third, but I'm going to show you more advanced ways soon. So this is what today's lesson is, showing you how to take those basic transitions of first, second, and third and use more advanced transitions. So let me show you some examples underneath the document camera of what we've been doing. So as an example, this is one that we've worked on before. This is an essay that we wrote. And as you can see, for our R1, we used first. For our R2, we use second. And for our R3, use third. Here's another one we worked on. Again, for our R1, we use first. For our R2, second. For our R3, third. And here's another one. So we've been using first, second, and third, which is fine. But today, I want to show you how to use more advanced transitions. So transition words help you to organize your essay. We include a transition word at the beginning of each middle paragraph and the conclusion. So you don't use a transition word for the introduction paragraph. You only use a transition word for each of the middle paragraphs and when starting the conclusion paragraph. And then as you become mature as a writer and you grow as a writer, you're going to be using more sophisticated transition words, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I have a list, and I'm going to share this a little bigger for you. This is a transition word list that shows you many different ways to say first, second, and third. So you can see here, these are all different ways to say first. This is for your R1 paragraph. And these are all different ways to say second for your R2 paragraph. And these are all different ways to say third for your R3 paragraph. And then we also want to try to always use a transition when we start our conclusion paragraphs. These are all ways that you can start your conclusion paragraph. Do any of these look familiar? Maybe you've seen some of these. To begin with is usually a common one. Usually for second, secondly. For third, last but not least. These are all ones that are pretty common with students writing. Now, what I want you to do, I'm going to take a piece of paper. Maybe you have a notebook right now or just a blank piece of paper. And I want you to, or if you have an index card, and I want you to write on your piece of paper, my transition word list. You write R1 with 2 lines, R2 with 2 lines, R3 with 2 lines, and C with 2 lines. I'll give you a few minutes just to write out that real quick. Okay, so now that you've written your transition word list, what I like to do is I like to pick my top 2 transition words for each paragraph, because sometimes having a list can be a little overwhelming. So I always like to pick my top transitions to use for R1. Now, yours aren't going to be the same as mine because I'm picking my top 2, but I do want you to see how I'm doing it. So for me, instead of using first, I love to use to begin with and for starters. Those are my 2 favorites. So I'm going to put to begin with and for starters, because those are my top 2 ways. Okay. Now I want you to do the same thing. I want you to pick your top 2 ways for R1, your top 2 transition words for R2, your top 2 transition words for R3, and your top 2 transition words from conclusion, and use this list here to pick them. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to fill out your transition word list. Okay, hopefully you finished it. As you're finishing, I'm going to be finishing mine. Again, I'm just picking my favorite ways. So I like secondly and furthermore. And then for R3, I like last but not least and lastly. And then for conclusion, I like to wrap it all up and as a review. Okay, so hopefully you have your transition word list complete. Now, I'm going to show you an example here. This is an essay. It's already complete. Now I want to point out with some colors here. Oh, I think my highlighter is drying out. Hang on. You can get a different one while you go to see these colors. Okay, so you can see we have our complete essay here. The orange box, that's my I paragraph. This is my R1 paragraph. The pink box is my R2. Yellow is R3 and green is conclusion. So you can see I have all 5 paragraphs. I want you to notice that every time I start a middle paragraph and my conclusion, I indent and have a transition word or transitional phrase. Okay. Instead of using first, I used to begin with. Instead of using the word second for R2, I used in addition. Instead of using third for R3, I use last but not least. And to start my conclusion, I use to wrap it all up. You can see these are from the transition word list. Okay, so instead of first, I use to begin with, right here. Instead of second, I use in addition. Oops, that one's not on here. I'm going to add it. Right there. For third, I use last but not least. And for conclusion, I use to wrap it all up. Now, these are just some transition words. If you have time later, you can take your writing notebook and you can Google transition words for first, transition words for second, transition words for third, transition words for conclusion, and you can keep adding and make a bigger list so you have more choices. So now that I have my transition word list, I want to show you. If I had an essay, now I've already written this essay, I just left the transition words off for today's lesson. I know that this is my I paragraph. I know all of this is my R1. All of this is my R2. All of this is R3. And all of this is C. So when I am thinking about my transition word, I know I had to indent, I've already indented. And for this one, for R1, I think I'm going to use for starters. So I'm going to put for starters, comma. After every transition word, you always have to put a comma. My favorite movie is Beauty and the Beast because I like the characters, period. That's my topic sentence. This is my topic sentence. So you always start your topic sentence with the transition word or phrase and then a comma. For R2, I'm going to use secondly. So I'm going to say secondly, comma. Beauty and the Beast is my favorite movie because the action is intense. That's my topic sentence. And then for R3, instead of putting third, I'm going to put last but not least. Last but not least, comma. Beauty and the Beast is my favorite movie because the music is entertaining. And then for my conclusion paragraph, I'm going to say to wrap it all up. To wrap it all up, comma, and then I go into my conclusion. So you can see I didn't use first, second, and third. I went off of my list. Now I could take any words from my transition word list. It doesn't have to be from this one. I could use anything, but I like narrowing it down to my top two. It just makes it easier when I'm choosing. Okay. Let's take a look at another essay. Now, I know you don't have this essay in front of you, but I still want you to be able to pick out transition words that you would use for it. So we know that's I, R1, R2, R3, C. Now, you don't have this essay in front of you. What I want you to do is just on a piece of paper, if you have one, we're just going to pretend you have this paper in front of you. I just want you to do like R1 and then a line. See how R1 and then a line, R2 and then a line, R3 and then a line, and C and then a line. And I want you to pretend this essay is in front of you. And I want you to write on your paper what transition words you would pick. Okay, so I want you to write what transition words you would pick. So as an example for me, I think I'm going to pick first to begin with on this one. So I would write to begin with, comma. Now you don't have this paper, so you're going to write it on your paper. So choose which one you would pick for R2, R3, and C. Go ahead and write that on your own paper. Okay, so hopefully you picked some of your transition words that you would use. I would use furthermore here, comma, lastly here, comma, and then as a review, comma. Okay, remember, The biggest thing with transition words and phrases is that you want to make sure that you're using them at the beginning of your middle paragraph and that you're indenting and putting a comma. Remember, the transition words are part of your topic sentence. You can see here, I'm going to highlight the topic sentences in yellow so you can see. You can see that the transition word starts the topic sentence. So really, a topic sentence has a transition word, comma, and then the rest of the sentence. So just try to use more advanced transitions. What I always tell students is that if you're stuck and you can't think of anything, and all you can think is of for a transition word is like first or second or third, then put it. That's fine. If you can't think of anything and you get stuck, it's fine. It's not that you're going to fail if you use first, second, and third. We just don't want you always using that. So try to use more advanced transitions, okay? And remember, this list that I gave you is just one list. You can add on to this and Google more. There are some pretty cool, fancy ways to use transition words and different transitional phrases that you can use for each of these. Okay, but these are just a common list of ones that are used regularly at the elementary level. Okay, so from now on, we're going to continue practicing in our next lesson, but we're not going to use first, second, and third anymore. We're going to continue using our more advanced transition words. Okay, all right, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you all at the next lesson. Bye, everyone.